Between 1939 and 1945, World War II consumed the near total resources of the largest, most powerful nations on Earth. The costs were staggering beyond imagination. An unexpected problem was finding enough people to do the work. Education for the young took second place. High school students not old enough for military service went to work in war-related industry. In 1943, the New Hampshire legislature passed a bill to release from school all students 15 years of age or older to do war work. Between 1940 and 1944, the number of teenage workers in America increased by almost 2 million, while the number attending school fell by over 1 million.
Unemployed or employed below their best capacity are 1 million Negroes.
Do you want to learn one of these jobs, Gilbert? Well, then that's the one for me.
In a month or 6 weeks, a man can go to work as a welder on ships, tanks, guns.
What I'm doing? Okay.
Teenagers weren't the only ones being called into the New Hampshire workforce. Minorities came to the state for factory work and field work at harvest time. German prisoners of war cut wood to help the paper industry in Berlin. Conscientious objectors to the war staffed the state hospital in Concord. And most significantly, women were called on to enter the workforce. They were to be equals, receiving equal pay and doing any job a man could. The role of women in American society was forever altered.
Among our young unmarried women and among older women whose children are grown, we have a large reserve. They discover that factory work is usually no more difficult than housework. Employers find that women can do many jobs as well as men, some jobs better. Machine operations requiring patience and accuracy attract them at once.
How do you like it?
I love it.
If you're a woman who has never worked, you will find courses ready for you. Prepare now. You will be needed. By the end of 1943, 1 out of every 2 active Americans will either be in war production or in the fighting forces. The rest of us will be feeding, clothing, housing the frontline fighters and workers. Only then will we be fighting with every muscle. Only at that point can we say that all work is war work.
During the war, 15 million Americans migrated to new jobs. No community in New Hampshire was more permanently altered by this migration than Portsmouth. The workforce at the Naval Shipyard grew from 3,300 in 1938 to over 20,000 in 1943. Added to it were the supportive industries that supplied parts and services to the shipyard. The population of the seacoast grew as never before. It put pressures on city services and schools, but most of all, housing. For those who couldn't find a place of their own, there were hotbeds, where a person working the day shift would share a cot with a person working the night shift.
Everybody in the city took in a boarder or a roomer. If you had a big house on Middle Street or Lincoln Avenue or Richards Avenue, and you had a nice old house that you lived in, you know, with your kids, you'd put a sink and a stove upstairs, and you had an apartment. And they never went back after the war to what it used to be, so that all of those houses on Lincoln Avenue and Miller Avenue, when you go by, you see 4 or 5 cars in front, and you say, what are all these cars doing? They're living there. They still have the apartments because they were needed at the time. People pleaded with you to, you know, to be able to take people in to work the big 3 shifts at the Navy Yard. Then when you got all through with it, the money was good, you know, there they were up there. You fixed up the places a little more, and people just kept the apartments up there. And it was the thing to do for the war effort.
If you ever go down Trinidad, they make you feel so very glad. Calypso sing and make a rhyme, guarantee you one real goodbye time. Drinking rum and Coca-Cola, go down Point Cumana, both mother and daughter, working for the Yankee dollar.
Long hours of work also limited the time people had for relaxation and recreation. One of the issues before the state of New Hampshire in 1943 was a bill allowing movie theaters to show films on Sunday afternoons. The legislature passed it with an amendment, leaving the final decision up to each locality. 90 million people went to the movies every week. What they saw did more than entertain. It reinforced the selling and support of the war. Hollywood put out hundreds of films meant to inspire, to build fear, and to incite. Accompanying each film was the weekly reel of news from the front, both across the oceans and at home. Through newsreels, Americans saw the events over there almost instantly.
A few of the many cameramen ready to cover D-Day. These Navy men will bring you pictures of this historical invasion. Of these war cameramen, we can only show you a few, but these are some of the men who will risk their lives to shoot this gigantic military venture.
It was during World War II that the electronic news media first showed itself as an important source for news, capable of beating newspapers with the story. Radio was king, and live reports from London and other war zones brought the war into every living room with an immediacy never before possible.
Our own ship is just gave its warning whistle. Here comes the plane. More anti-aircraft fire. Inboard toward the shore. Here we go again. Another plane's come over. Looks like we're going to have a night tonight. Give it to her, boys. Another one coming over. Now 12:10, beginning of June 7th, 1944. This is George Hicks speaking. I now return you to the United States.
But it wasn't radio or newsreels or Life magazine that brought the war close to home for everyone. It was friends, lovers, sons, fathers. In the center of every New Hampshire town was its honor roll, a listing of the men and women off fighting the war. Through their absence, the war touched every town, every church, every family, and every person in their own private way.
Oh, yes, I had a brother-in-law who was a prisoner of war for several months. We were very concerned about that. My wife's only sister, husband. And I had two brothers in the war. One was in the Tank Corps and one was in the Navy.
His name was Roland, but he had a nickname. We called him Pat. We all have nicknames, all the kind of Franco-Americans have nicknames. My nickname is B. My real name is Lauria. And he said, would you have some regular underclothes? And when he took his shirt off, I said, my God, you going overseas? He said, yes, but don't tell Mommy. I don't want her to know.
And in those days, mail was delivered twice a day, so it came in the morning. And when my father came home from the office at lunch, he looked at it. It had Senator Bridges' embossed envelope, and he didn't open it. And I said to him, aren't you going to open that? And he said no, and went back to the office. And of course, when he came home for dinner, the letter was still there. And I opened, and I said again, aren't you going to open that? We were both scared that it had something bad in it.
When I was over there, I figured the chances of coming back were pretty slim. In fact, the type of a unit I was in, we had 10% chance to get out of it. So I just went from day to day, figuring, well, I ain't going to come back anyway. I'll do the best I can. But as it was, I made it.
I think his mother's prayers, every day, probably every hour, she must have prayed for him, because she's very religious, very.
56,000 people from New Hampshire left home to fight in the battles of World War II. Most returned. 1,595 did not. They are remembered today with monuments in parks and town commons around the state. And they are remembered by those who lived on.
17 of the boys that we knew were killed. And strangely, there were brothers, the blood brothers, the Crafts brothers, the White brothers, in families that we knew well. And so, this was very distressing.
We used to see houses with gold stars where they lost either one boy or one daughter, two boys in the war. We knew these people. It was very uncomfortable.
It was on the 26th day of November. It was the day after Thanksgiving that the telegram came true that he was missing in action, and it was on the 26th day of December that the telegram read that he was dead. He had been killed in action. His life was lost at sea. And even if he was in the Air Force, his name is on the monument at Hampton Beach of all the sailors, or the soldiers, or the men that died at sea during the World War II. His name is on there because he was killed at sea.
Supreme Headquarters has announced that General Hodges' 1st United States Army has crossed the Rhine. Elements breached the Rhine and crossed to establish a bridgehead on the east bank, somewhere south of Cologne.
4:25 Eastern Wartime, Bob Height reporting. In a little over an hour and a half, the last German forces in Europe will lay down their arms and the fighting will be officially over. The end of nearly 6 years of war for many allied. In New York at 8:30 tonight, the torch on the Statue of Liberty will be relighted for the first time since Pearl Harbor.
The world will note
Bob
that the
Height
first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, a military base. If Japan does not surrender, bombs will have to be dropped on her war industry.
7 p.m. Eastern Wartime. Bob Kopp reporting. The Japanese have accepted our terms fully. That's the word we've just received from the White House in Washington. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of the Second World War. The United Nations, on land, on the sea, in the air, and to the four corners of the earth, are united and are victorious.
It wasn't very long before I heard horns blowing and church bells ringing, because we didn't live very far from the center of town. There was all kinds of people down there, and they were hooting and hollering and just, you know, rejoicing and hugging and kissing and everything, doing all kinds of things. The whole square down here was filled with people. And all of a sudden, I was standing watching everything, and the sailor come up and just grabbed me and gave me a big hug and kiss. And he was going around grabbing all the girls he could grab. And it was just, I don't know what his name was or anything. I didn't know who he was or anything. It was just, you know, just a happy time. And he was so happy that everything was over, that he wasn't going to have to go do anything else, I suppose, you know.
World War II changed everything. It was the first war in which civilian deaths outnumbered military deaths. Genocide reached unspeakable levels of horror, and weaponry gave new meaning to mass destruction. But World War II also led to the creation of the United Nations, Israel, the European Common Market, NATO, the Iron Curtain, and the Cold War. The war that brought incalculable death and destruction to much of the world brought prosperity to the United States. For America, World War II ended the Great Depression, created a baby boom, fueled the civil rights movement, split the atom, and planted the seeds for travel into outer space. Most importantly, America would never again be a country that lived apart from the world community. For those who lived through World War II, there are empty spaces in the heart that can never be filled, and there are sweet memories that will never be dimmed. The war was a sustained moment of community in America that profoundly touched everyone. It may well be that the United States was never more united.
And at Christmas, every house had red lights in them as a symbol of war or whatever and it was so beautiful, and that always stayed in my mind. And I would imagine that probably if you were standing on the other side of the river on the hill, that we were the same way. That is and even now at Christmas, I will go out and look over there, and I think about that. I think about that when all those houses were lit up in a prayer and in memory to bring the boys home. It was just something that you did.